I would like to revisit why I got so excited when you dropped that phrase, Paul. And I often feel like I'm sort of the skunk at the garden party when I show up at these conversations, TLC. It's usually about some religious topic, and I'm, trying to keep up and show interest and be polite. And um,
You don't
obviously,
want to see your fancy church, Paul.
I thought it was beautiful. Like I spent 10 days in Paris years and years ago. It was my first trip to Paris years ago. And I'm like, if I lived in Paris, I'd be in church every Sunday. Like it was just, I just went to every church I could get to and all the museums. I just loved it. Absolutely stunningly beautiful. Um, but and in all the marriage conversations, I've been in a bunch of those, and I would be the guy saying, "Hey, look, I love marriage, but I think it's in trouble," right? And that was kind of, to summarize, that was my, I was trying to be a kind of gentle skeptic, but supportive of like we gotta come up with something here, right? And the so the concept of universal basic income is an acknowledgement that there are threats to the basic survival of lots of people because of all the developments we're talking about, right? AI being the most, salient. And so you acknowledge that, like, uh-oh, that there are forces at work that are undermining the value of traditional work, and we can't just let people have nothing to do. So that's a proposed answer. And Paul, I 100% endorse your take on that. Probably not going to go the way you think. Besides being highly inflationary and all sorts of other things. What do you do about real estate? It's not fungible. What do you do? You just reset zero. It's like, so okay, now what do you do? Rents immediately go up by $1,000 a month or whatever. So but the point is there's an implicit acknowledgement that we need this, and there are larger forces at work that are threatening, just a basic income. And so this is a proposed solution to that. And then you come along with universal basic institutions. And of course, I immediately, in my brain, frame it the same way, which is there are forces at work, they're larger than any of us, that are eating away at the foundations of so many of the institutions that we have come to rely on for the society that we all love, and benefit from. And therefore, we need to have some kind of an answer for that. And I've kind of started thinking about churches almost as like civilization builders or sustainers, I think many churches might be well served to think of themselves that way if they don't. I will often say I'm not as interested in the doctrinal distinctions, but I am interested in the function that the church has served in community, in the glue that holds a community together, right? My mythical medieval village that I'm, pining for. So, but in order to have that conversation, you kind of need to get to the heart of why so many of these institutions are losing faith with the people who they're supposedly trying to help. And you started with a little bit of that when you talked about corruption and trying to deal with that, but it's also just rent seeking. It's also just the status that you gain by being involved. Like, you go to Yale and now you can say that for the rest of your life. There's all these non-monetary advantages. You elbow your way to the front of the room and you get into, get on that committee, or you get to influence policy. And the people doing that, they're convinced that they're doing the Lord's work, right? They're in many cases they're not what we would call corrupt or whatever, where they're overtly thinking that they're somehow taking advantage of the system for their own gain, at least
They're
not
true believers.
self-consciously.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so probably the three of us would get lots of agreement, maybe not on every single point, but on most points, that the institutions are also failing us in all kinds of ways. So I would almost argue that the threats that we're all seeing and acknowledging are in some ways hastening a kind of deconstruction that at some level is kind of deserved, right? In the music world, everybody's worried about Suno and AI and what it's going to do to creatives. And I'm like, well, I mean, it goes all the way back to pop music. It goes all the way back to here. I know the formula. Get to the chorus in the first 30 seconds and these three chord progressions. And we know what you want. We're going to get even more of it and harder, right? And the whole industry is built around the song, right? You got to get the hit song, right? And the cynicism that's underneath that, the abstraction away from the sheer love of the art of it, right, is you've already embedded in it the thing that's going to make you susceptible when you turn on the radio and you can't tell whether it's AI or not, right? And so you sort of deserve what happens to you at some level, right? because you don't actually believe in what you claim you believe, right? So the, the you know the that to me is so much more. I don't have a solution to that, by the way, but that to me is so much richer as a question, right? It's like the 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 from within the institution, the ethos to perpetuate it at all costs, and what that has cost its relevance to modern life. So many institutions, the reason why they're losing relevance is because they have ceased to be relevant, right? They have become overtaken by rent seekers. They've been there many decisions have been made. That's what the secrecy in the church was, right? It's like we can't let this get out because it's going to damage the reputation of the institution and so forth. And you pointed to the conversation this morning, Paul, on Luke's stream, uh, also talking about just the ways that institutions are no longer, the technological component to that, right? Where you have options. If you have an unpleasant experience, you just take your business elsewhere, right? Um, so in a sense, that's such a big conversation that we could be chasing rabbits down trails for the rest of our conversation. But particularly since you both are devout religious men, and I think the church is such a critical um, civilization builder, it seems that at least I need to bring that up, right? Because that's what I was thinking when you said that. It's like, okay, do we agree that there is such a thing as a universal basic institution? Do we agree on that? Um, it, it, do we agree that there is at least such a thing, even if we can't point to one that we all agree is one, say, right? Just do we agree at a conceptual level, right? Because of course that goes back to where I started with you, Paul, which is UPVK, which is that as soon as you said, without individuals and without institutions, I thought yes, right? Like, and whatever it is I've devoted my life to, how many of them end up as institutions? Well, who knows? Depends on how you're going to use the definition, right? How many of them, live beyond my lifetime, for example, or whatever, right? Or is there a budget amount? If it's over a certain budget, is that now an institution? It depends on how you're going to evaluate that. But I have been basically devoting my life to finding ways to build organizations, start them and build them to address what seemed like obvious needs to me within various communities, various projects, right? And it's kind of like I got on the marriage conversation. Hey, I love marriage. I think we're in trouble. It's not like I don't love institutions. I actually would challenge Luke on all institutions are inherently demonic. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not so sure about that, right? I actually have some quibbles with that position. But I do see the critique, right? So anyway, I've said a lot. I'll stop.
I, I'm I'm gonna there's the mytho. So your concept of religion kind of bringing these things through time. I jokingly think about that as like the Ark of the Covenant. It's the vessel preserving the covenant that brings it through time, and it's that symbol, that symbol.
Throw some manna in there so they don't
So
forget.
yeah, put some
Absolutely.
manna, the law, the rod. uh, uh, Rod, you didn't know you were in the Ark. No. uh, so the the mythos, people are going to hate that, but the story that we tell is not about the greatness of us. It's about how we messed up again and again and again and came back to the path. Um, that's the story, at least. I'm preaching to the preacher now, so it's dangerous. But I think if the story was how great the church was, and how reliably faithful everyone was, and we were in the current present moment, I would be much more concerned. Um, the story is, they dragged Jesus away to be crucified, and everyone ran off and hid. Um, and then they hid in a room for longer, and it's I agree. The resilience of the institution needs to account for that. So the moments of opulence are going to happen. The moments of people manipulating the institution for their monetary or sexual desires is going to happen.
Or
And
ideological.
what's
Or ideological,
or
right?
ideological, yes, or political, yeah, absolutely. And there needs to be a recentering. Now, the Christian myth is, people again going to hate that I'm not using myth in a way that it's fake, but the story, the narrative accounts for that, in that we continually mess up and have to come back to that which is greater than us. So I guess my sense is that the church is has had a moment of institutional fail. The churches have moments of institutional failure. The the moment we are in right now, there's an abundance of explanatory narratives, like mediating narratives. How do we explain all of these things we see? And I can go on the internet and explain things in 500 different ways. Um, but most people need one mediating narrative. Um, and to the extent, I mean, the you're left with the gospel, the good news is that is a attractive mediating narrative for many people and has been for generations. And I would say that at some level, the institution is relying on that mediating narrative, um, which I profess as true as a Catholic. When I'm speaking in generalities here, I think there are, I think in the abundance of narratives that we have, there's going to be attractor points within that, ideological or religious. And I think the institutions are kind of building around them, or and those support some of I think those mythos are kind of core to these institutions. um and some of the creedal stuff is liturgical act, which is sort of binding of those institutions. um and so i i I'm going to be more practical now. Like, audit one's own life, and thinking about their, if you think that institutions are important and this is a plausible way to think about the world, the audit of one's own life, and like, all right, here are the institutions I participate in, here's why I participate in them, and this is what I am gaining from them, and making it conscious. There's so much below the waterline that we take for granted and we don't realize is fundamental to how we operate on a day to day. Like, if my grocery store no longer attaches to the supply chain, or if my payment systems break down, where do I go? Who do I go to? Um, and that's like a really subtractive way to think about it. And it's like feels doomeristic. But I think that's like, who am I relying on that I do not notice I'm relying on? And then treat those like participations. Like, I know I go to the same grocery store most of the time, and I know the managers, I know the people there, and part of that's intentional. Like, I go to the same restaurants because I want to have a relational interaction with these things, which are feel like big corporates. But I know if push comes to shove and I show up the door and there's only so much rice in the back, they know me.
We're alike in this way, Paul. I'm the same way.
Now,
Eh, go ahead.
Well, the speech that Rod gave, I'm going to clip out because this
I
is
got more, Paul. I got more.
I know Rod can go on forever. Rod and I have gone on for hours. Rod and I got Joe Rogan has nothing on me and Rod. Some of our conversations have gone on a long time. But I love that speech that Rod gives right there because it is true and it is so important to hear.
Yep.
Now, where I want to sort of connect your paper that Rod didn't get a chance to read, and that was my fault, with Rod's argument was is because I think underneath a lot of what Rod has said over the years is the question is the church not the universal basic institution? Because that question, I think, Rod and I will go way back and he talks about walking past this, this abandoned church or this church they're going to take down and put up and that's going to happen a lot in the next 20 years. And they're not going to be big, beautiful churches. They're going to be churches like Living Stones that, it could very well be that 10 years from now, you come to Sacramento that where did Paul Vanderklay make all those wordy videos? And you're going to find a Taco Bell. That wouldn't surprise me a bit. But because these institutions are connected and there are hierarchies, and Rod himself said, we cannot understand Western civilization and the fruit that it has given us. And this is sort of Jordan Peterson's main thesis going back. You're going to have to somehow get into the question of, as you said, Paul, narrative, this narrative of voluntary self-sacrifice, which Jordan Peterson tends to point to, or then sort of housed and curated, there's a museum word, and nurtured by this vessel called the church. And of course, part of what is the really interesting conversation between Protestant and Catholic has everything to do with that vessel. And it has everything to do with that vessel physically. I mean, you can when you look at that church that you put up on the screen, you might say, boy, for a lot of years from the 50s to the 80s, what kind of churches were built in neighborhoods? What kind of Catholic churches were built in neighborhoods? They didn't have pictures of, they didn't look like that over the last 50 years. And of course, Rod can very quickly connect that up to movements in the art world, et cetera, et cetera. But when we look at when I looked at the Scott Adams online funeral, I saw there's been a digital substitution that has taken place. And I don't look at no, I'm sorry, I don't look at Scott Adams as an iconoclast. I mean, the Protestants certainly did that, and we keep getting crap for that from the Orthodox right now, the Orthobros. But the question is, did Scott Adams fail the institutions, or did the institutions fail Scott Adams? And of course, that goes both ways. But the primary question that we have to ask as a civilization, which we are having in spades right now as a culture, is, at least in the United States, can we actually continue to go on without a religion or a container for that religion? And of course, in the United States, we sort of pioneered, no, we are a secular state, but yet most people can look back in American history and say, we didn't we didn't have a state church. We didn't have the Church of England or the Church of Rome, but we had sort of a community of churches that were very comfortable being fuzzy about the distinctives that Rod doesn't have a lot of interest in necessarily, but that those agreements did help us provide that function, that temple, as you put it in your taxonomy, provided. And that was at the top of the hierarchy. And the way that sort of goes down is an orienting function that says, why is it important that we have space in a new subdivision? We reserve that little 5 acre lot on the corner, not for the Taco Bell, but for this funny little institution that actually, and we no longer do that, but we used to do that. And I mean, those are really the questions that are sort of grabbing us now as a nation when we say, and my channel I've talked a lot about, when I look at McLaughlin on talking to Alex O'Connor, everybody from the left now is like, we should have we want the church to do a better job, but we don't care to actually go to one because there are plenty of churches that believe like Brett McLaughlin does. But why would he bother to show up on Sunday? But if he doesn't show up on Sunday, if he doesn't do the voluntary self-sacrifice of putting something in the plate, if he doesn't give his time, if he doesn't give his attention, if he doesn't give his children to that universal basic institution that might be the church, well, then potentially the whole society begins to say, or it can't even critique and say, well, you know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that's some good stories and there's some good movies there, and but it doesn't last, and maybe that which makes us a we in Peugeotian terms won't last. So I'll play Rod's speech all day long because I think he's right. And I love the fact that he comes into this religious group of people, and I want Rod to be more bold. And I'll just keep pushing him.
My my politeness is gets in my way. Uh, by the way, on the Scott Adams thing, like I texted or I on our little signal thing, I texted the other day to you and the group. I said, "This is big. What he's doing right now, he's inviting us to his deathbed.
Yeah.
Like that ritualizing death. Like we need updated rituals, and he's experimenting. He's leading the way." And I thought, like, that's very big what he's doing. Um, okay, this is probably the hardest thing that I or the harshest thing that I would have to say on the subject present company considered. And so before I say it, I'm gonna tell a little quick little story so you'll understand a little bit of the context. Paul, some of this PBK, some of this will sound familiar. So I was raised in a fundamentalist Bible-based home church environment and very strict. Um, no TV in the house, no radio in the house. You know, like we read the Bible every morning with my dad. Like this is
Rigor.
serious, right? Yeah. Of course, I hated it. But being the conscientious little kid I was, like I was also all in. You know, like I hated it, but I just want to be normal. But I also wanted to participate. But I remember, so this particular group doesn't matter. Details aren't important, and I'm not here to single anyone or anything out in particular. But one of their claims was that they went all the way back to the apostles, that they were the one true church. Sound familiar? um, and that they were the truth, capital T. And it had no beginning. There was no founder. There was no, you know, there was it just goes all the way back, right? And of course, they couldn't have anticipated the internet. Um, so they didn't know that this lie, because that's what it was a lie, would ultimately be revealed, right? And I remember as a kid, it was so it was one of those groups, somebody from the old country, you know, kind of a firebrand, split off from some tent revival thing in Ireland and came to the States and started setting up meetings all over the country and sending people out two by two and you know, during the same time that you've talked about many times, Paul, about that others were doing the same thing, right? And so he had a name, and you now on the internet you can find the newspaper article clippings about when this all happened, right? And then he kind of went crazy and like started declaring himself the Messiah and moved to Jerusalem and waited for Christ to return. Like it just went crazy. And then he was excommunicated. And but his fellow co-founders, some of them were still alive when I was a very small child. So I remember meeting them. They're like in their 90s, you know, like one was over 100 years old, I remember. And so I've physically been in the same space with the guys who knew the truth. So I say that story so you understand a little bit about my formation, right? It's like you lied to me, right? You lied about something kind of important, right? Now, I would argue that that it was replete with lies, but that was one of those like it's a lie. I can use that word. I don't have to say it wasn't true. I don't have to say it was a misunderstanding. I don't have to say it's like, well, it's a matter of faith. Like, no, this was a lie. This was like there were people who knew. Now, I'm sure there were many who did not know. It was like that man's name was just erased from the history of the organization. It's like we just don't. It's like he who must not be named. And if you bring it up now, oh, I see you've been on the internet, right? So that, you know, will hopefully help you understand a little bit about my orientation and maybe some of the people out there watching too. But again, my point is not to direct disproportionate critique in that direction because like this is the point I'm about to make, right? The truth ends up really mattering in terms of the health and life and sustainability of an organization. And my belief is that institutions, the real corruption has been to become extremely, um, let's say, flexible with the truth. And I understand that that word, like, it's not as if I claim the truth or anything like that. It's just we know when we see that we have been deceived, right? Or misguided or misled, or, right? And so my take on the last 500 years is little by little, the explanatory power of particularly the religious institutions, has been degraded by better explanations, right? And so instead of, many organizations have been like, well, we got to update our priors now because we have this new information. We know a lot more about the universe that we occupy and so forth, right? Many organizations have sort of plugged their ears and said like not listening, right? But just so I don't reserve my criticism for religious institutions, we also had the president of Harvard, testify to Congress that she couldn't she couldn't tell you what a woman was or whatever, right? Like so and the
Or
reason why
fudged
that
her
was so
footnotes.
also, right? The reason why that was so catastrophic is because the rest of us are watching. It's like you're embarrassing yourself right now. Yet within that cloistered environment, that hermetically sealed self-referential echo chamber, they had completely lost the plot in terms of an actual commitment to the truth, right? Of course, I could go on. I'll stop. But the, the what I'm interested in is how often I see a lot of hand waving around, well, is it true or not, right? And even within the TLC, I'm surprised at how little I see engagement with, say, like a Dr. Bart Ehrman or like a James Tabor, like people, deep biblical scholarship who are at least challenging a lot of the premises behind, Christianity, right? And that doesn't mean necessarily that I'm challenging Jesus Christ, the historical figure, because like I actually, I kind of like that guy. But I have a lot of problems with the institution that has grown out of that movement. And I'm not going to be the first to say, I wonder what the man Jesus Christ would think of the movement that carries his name today. That is the harshest thing I can and will ever say about the subject, but that hopefully it will help you understand, where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Um, it's and I think these things are good to hear. Um, and I I came from a very equally equally religiously fervent, but theologically very different upbringing, which like things like evolution and literalism of Genesis, that sort of thing just was
Yeah,
sort of a non-issue.
right.
And so, and I'm thankful for that. I I think there's different layers of what is well, the senses of reality. I think there's this propositional reality thing which is important because people are, as I was saying, people are seeking a mediating narrative. What is the narrative that I can go through life and use it as a roadmap or a something that can direct me along the path. And if you come across a situation where your mediating narrative is in strong conflict with things you are perceiving or a alternative, someone else's map, and there's a strong conflict, it's going to derail your narrative. Um, and justifiably so. Like, throw out the term Bayesian updating. They're new facts, you change your beliefs, as you should. I I'm going to say something in Bayesian terms. I think the priors are broad enough. The possible beliefs on the propositional were broad enough in Catholicism that we could update to the new facts, and it didn't break the model. It just moved the emphasis. Um, and somebody can come on and disagree with me on that, and I'm fine with that. But I think the flexibility in there are a few different metaphysical there are different metaphysical there's a lot of argument on metaphysical backgrounds, and like there are a lot of scientists doing different things within the Catholic tradition that permitted some flexibility that allowed more updating. But I would say that we religion the narratives, the explanatory narratives need to confront the perceived reality. And if you find it's a lie, that if you clear lies definitely invalidate things in the whole narrative. um I think the communal participation with your local the locality of it is helpful in that I am participating with this ancient tradition, but I'm also in a community of people who are right here trying to participate in this ancient community at tradition as a 21st century American in a specific place. And so I don't go to church with any first century Jews. Go to church with a bunch of people who are kind of like me, who are trying to participate in these liturgies as people in their own in the lived reality. I don't know if that helps answer. I don't think the point is to answer, but I think it's to explain that, yeah, I agree with you. um there is a point. um if this is that's the perspective, the propositional. If there is something fundamental participatory about the church or temple institutions that we need as orienting for us personally, and then at us socially, we need to be able to look up at the same thing. if if someone's worshiping Monet and somebody's worshiping Iron Man and somebody's worshiping Jesus, it's going to be a really difficult conversation. uh, Having a common orientation permits a lot culturally. um, and that is embodied in acts of worship where people are sitting in front of sitting in front of the icon and meditating and looking up to it in an actual act, either at the art museum or in the theater or at church. um, and it can be a metaphorical icon if you're an iconoclast. uh, uh, the so the common sip at the funeral thing was great. It's let's participate in a common cup, which we are all. It's the universality of this common act, which brings us back to our departed. All the times we've done this with our departed member. Um, my church does that. um,
Very
uh,
clever, Paul.
and no,
You're right.
it's not. And my point isn't that we we have this urge, we need to do this, we want this comment. There's something fundamental in us that needs to do this. There's something social that we need this universal participation in this, in something of a community or institution. And we want I think the question isn't anything, it's what's going to fill that role. What is that participation, where where should we be showing up? Because I think we're going to be showing up. We're going to need to show up somewhere. Um,
And part of the there's a Jesus and Iron Man and Monet and the did the Scott Adams community have a name? Um,
Good
there's
question.
a la Jordan Peterson and Tom Holland, there's a connection running through all of these things. And Iron Man and Endgame is intelligible because of how it's downstream from the Jesus story and these narratives. But I think, Rod, I want to broaden, I want to broaden the power of your story because we are currently living in a time when the explanatory when we talked about mediating narratives, we talked about explanatory narratives, and in many ways, in an embodied way, what we're looking for is if I do these things, I'll get these good, blessed outcomes. And when you look at something like marriage, women who got married in the 1960s discovered in the 1970s that it wasn't enough to hitch your wagon to a man who was going to work for IBM and get his gold watch and get his retirement package. And you just needed to marry the guy and you were set for life. No, he dumped you for the secretary. And now the fact that you didn't study in college or get a college education, and the fact that traditionally you award the children to the woman, and he's got a pretty good lawyer, so he's not paying that much alimony. So now you're living in poverty. And so they, of course, always tell their daughters, now you're going to see a lot of romance about the man and stuff, but don't buy that. You had better secure for yourself a good education and a good career. Now, if you want to marry, marry for love, but keep your head about you. And if things start looking wobbly, get the hell out of there because after all, you can't trust him. But then you have the question of the container, which is marriage. And you have this on, well, if I go to work for IBM, I'll have a job for the rest of my life and I'll have a pension. And no, no, now it's up to you. There's no longer some pension managers that are going to, keep an eye on the stock market. You can keep your head down working on whatever it is, whatever widget your corporation is making, and your pension managers will make sure that when you retire, there'll be plenty of money for you. No, it's up to you to determine where you should put your money and what you should invest in. And so if you choose wisely, sorry, it was a defined contributions package. And we're just seeing this everywhere we go. And so then it's like, well, you began talking about the meta problem. Well, we had the poly problem, and the poly problem sort of yields into the meta problem that, well, what if the retirement system, I just, watched a video about what percentage of baby boomers are only, really only have Social Security. And I can put names on some of those things because I watch some people in my church try to live on Social Security. They're maybe in their third marriage, and the husband who owned the house died. He didn't have the house fully paid off. She doesn't have the income level to, her son. I mean, it just boom, 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 boom. Poly becomes meta very quickly, and poverty ensues. And so that it isn't disconnected from the fact that, doggone it, that pastor, I looked up to him. And or maybe it wasn't a pastor, maybe it was Philip Yancey, who sold 17 million Christian books about all of the nuanced and stuff about faith, and he carried on an 8-year affair. So suddenly it's not just the religious institutions, it's the marital institutions. And again, where this came up, universal basic institutions. And so then the young man says, so the young man is told, don't marry a woman because all that's going to happen is, when the whole thing breaks down, she's going to take half your money. You're better off, she'll probably sleep with you if you talk to her the right way and if you look the right way. And the last thing you want to do is marry her. But this is traveling through how many levels of our society? And of course, we have Vietnam, and can we trust the government? Trump is changing a whole bunch of the undefined sort of pageantry of government and switching to, oh, we're going to build a ballroom. Oh, um, so this is, but again, I come back to, is the church the universal basic institution upon which all these other things sort of grow? And in some ways, the idea of secularism was, no, you don't really need that slot. That's just a slot. But when that slot gets removed, suddenly you begin to ask, what is filling that slot? And I sometimes tell the story of a woman that I knew. It was her second marriage. It was his second or third marriage. He was quite a bit older than her. Wasn't a good marriage. They were estranged, but he's dying in the ER in a not a very elegant, quiet way. And though she's estranged, she's watching at least the children she had from him, you know, in the tension of this. And her brother comes, and I knew both of these were raised in this church years ago, and they embrace in that waiting room off the ER, and they don't embrace each other and sing a song, Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine. They sing, you got to know when to hold him, know when to fold him, know when to walk away, and know when to run. And I thought, why do I love Rod's speech? Because they sang that song. They didn't sing Great is Thy Faithfulness. They didn't sing Amazing Grace. They didn't sing how many Christian hymns I can think of. They sang a Kenny Rogers song that impacted them at a particular time in their life. But then I ask myself, would it have been better if, in fact, that universal basic institution had blessed them more? Would they have had a better song to sing?